Hey everyone, can I have your attention for 1 minute, please? Just before we start class. My name's Andre. I'm in 160, and as you know, over the past few lectures, we've been talking about IDEO and how they brainstorm and stuff. Well, tomorrow, Dennis Boyle, who's a co-founder of IDEO, is going to give a talk about brainstormers. There's actually going to be a brainstormer following his talk tomorrow at 6 o'clock in the City Auditorium. It's open to anyone, so if you want to go, feel free to show up. It's being hosted by the DEC, the Design and Engineering Collaborative. If you want to stick around and get more information about the club who's putting it on, you can go to dec.berkeley.edu. But otherwise, just come to the talk. It'll be fun.
All right. Thanks for finding this really relevant event. Welcome back, everyone, to CS160. Today we're going to talk about task analysis and contextual inquiry. But before we delve into that material, let's do our usual review of a particular user interface that you get to critique. Today we're going to look at the Daily. Who's used in the room the Daily app before? Who's heard about the Daily app before? Okay, so this is news. This is new for most of you. Let's pull up their video.
Introducing The Daily, the first daily national news, entertainment, and sports publication created from scratch for the iPad. Here's how it works. Let's start at the front page. The Daily features the following sections: news, gossip, opinion, arts and life, apps and games, and sports. Tap a section to go there. Tap the logo to get back to the front page. It's easy to move from article to article. Just flip the way you would a newspaper or magazine. Tap here to open the visual browser, which lets you skim easily and quickly. See what you've read and what you haven't, so you don't miss a thing. Tap this button to open the carousel, an easy way to browse the whole issue. Tap here within the carousel to see the control panel. You can watch a video about today's edition, listen to stories read aloud, autoplay through the carousel till you find something you like, or shuffle to something you haven't read yet. You'll also find your saved articles and app settings here. Articles have plenty of interactive elements like galleries, videos, 360-degree photos, and hotspots, which you can tap for more info. Touch, swipe, tap, and explore to bring stories to life. You can share web-friendly versions of articles with friends. Tap here to open the sharing dashboard to post articles on Facebook and Twitter. You can also email articles and tap the paperclip button to save articles for later. Jump to apps and games to play crossword and Sudoku puzzles. You can keep track of your times and play against other people. You can download each new issue of the Daily whenever your iPad is connected to the internet. Just open the app and the day's edition will automatically start downloading. It changes and updates throughout the day. You'll find the Daily in the App Store. The first 2 weeks are free, and then it's just 99 cents a week. We hope.
All right, so that was the Daily app. We launched about 2 years ago, and it was one of the biggest enterprises at the time to try to take the magazine reading experience from paper to tablets. Reactions, critiques from you. What is appealing, what works well in this interface, and where do you see potential problems?
I like the ability to scroll through and see like a visual little thumbnail of the pages. I think that's like a good feature of magazines that you lose with like an iPad normally if you're trying to read a book or something. I wish it was a little bit bigger because I feel like it might be hard to actually see. So I'm not sure how big it winds up being without having it in front of me, but that was just my reaction.
Okay, so one reaction is the visual thumbnail previews of pages help you get the overall gestalt, the sense of the issue, in ways that simply reading page by page doesn't. So I think that's something important to point out, right? There's not just the reading task, but there are other tasks that go along with reading, like skimming, flipping through, that also have to explicitly be designed for. Okay, other reactions?
I thought it wasn't intuitively obvious, like all the actions. Like, let's say if you got the app without someone telling you what to do, like getting to the carousel or returning back to each different part of the interview.
Okay, so what I hear is you say there may be an issue with discoverability. How do I know what is where, especially if UI elements fade in and fade out of view? And how do I learn where all of these things are? Yes, good point. Others, there were a couple more hands. Yes?
There's no textual table of contents, as far as I can tell. If they're trying to emulate like a magazine experience, if I get a magazine, I don't flip through the pages. I want like a list of articles that I can pick from. And it doesn't look like they really have that. You have to kind of swipe one by one or look at the visual thing. You can't, sometimes you can't really see the headline from there.
Okay, so once again, this is the comment is about, was there a table of contents? Didn't seem like there was in the video. Maybe there is one, but that brings up actually a great general question. Why do we have a table of contents in a regular magazine? Well, it gives you the pages so you can then flip to the right page. If we're in a digital medium, do page numbers still matter? You could just have links, right? And presumably maybe there are links, but maybe there's also less of a need of a catalog of everything in the first place, because what you could also do is you could offer search, which there's no way to efficiently search a paper magazine. So there is a question of how closely you want to stick to that metaphor of pages that you flip through. To what extent does that help people with their mental model? And to what extent does it get in the way because it prevents you from leveraging the unique strengths of a digital medium? Right. Any other potential strengths or shortcomings?
Saving and sharing, perfect digital copies is awesome. I mean, that's such a great feature of having a digital magazine to be able to share it and not have be xeroxing or ripping copies out, right? And it looked pretty intuitive too. With it, they've got the standard Facebook, and they may have. It depends on how they saved. Like how do you save the articles for later? Is it
yeah, how do you save and how do you share? So saving and sharing are strengths of the digital medium. But note there was actually something going on in the video that said, and you can share web accessible versions. Because now there's the problem, what if you want to share with someone who's not paying for the app? What do you do then? Or they don't have an iPad. And so there's these extra layers of complexity start to appear, and you somehow have to design for those. Any other thoughts? Yes.
I really liked the shuffle because I feel like with a lot of electronic things, you lose the serendipitous aspect of discovering something new. And so when you have shuffle, that kind of brings it back in, and it's not necessarily like pushing content to recommended where you basically yeah, so her comment was about serendipitous discovery. Kind of, I think the first comment also went into that direction, that specifically designing for that is actually a nice design insight. And doing that well also is not trivial at all.
I believe they tried to modernize the newspaper and magazine, so they brought something new to the industry. For example, I see the point of the Kindle to be that successful was its simplicity and its similarity to the real magazines and books. But in this case, it is not similar and it's not obvious to use. So I mean, it gets time to people get used to using this app.
Yeah, so this application may propose a new model for consuming written content with images and maybe interactive features. And if that is very different from what people are used to, and you can point to two directions, right? You can point both to paper magazines, and of course you can also point, this started in 2011, you can point to all of the news sites on the web as two competing models, and they're doing yet a third way, and it may be hard to get people to buy into a model. It may take user training, especially if you violate their assumptions in important ways. So who knows how the daily is doing these days? So I think this was decided about last month. So it was the first really big, high monetary investment foray into magazine publishing, and it did not do so well. And now, of course,
you can ask, was that due to questions of user interface design, or was it just bad writing, or was it bad marketing strategy? And in the end, there's probably a component of all of these. All right, just quickly wanted to review the brainstorm from last class. So have all of you found all of your group members? Raise your hand if you're still trying to track down people in your group. Okay, so that there's at least 3 hands. That means one to 3 groups are still looking for a team member. If for some reason you couldn't come last time because the flu's going around or there was some other good reason, please get in touch with your team right away, and your team as well. Please email the missing team member right away, because we need to get on top of any potential issue with team formation now. All right, how many ideas did you come up with while the brainstorm happened? Just throw out a number. 37, 5, 14.
Are you talking like big ideas, like concrete ideas, or many small ideas that later develop?
I think maybe it's too early at that state to say whether an idea is big or small. That may only become obvious in hindsight. Okay, so that means you got most of the way there to 250 ideas. What was easy, what was hard for you guys in the teams? Anyone want to report back?
Trying to get visual and not just listing things out in an orderly fashion. We're used to thinking in a very structured format, and not doing that. It's hard to break free.
Yep. Being visual is hard if you're not used to it. And definitely as we walked around for the first half hour, everyone was writing bullet point lists, right? So that's where we decided to actually have a break. And that seemed to have worked. Lots of groups then started to be more visual. Yes, Moshe.
I really wanted to apply the numbers to all the ideas, but I just when the time came, I just forgot about it. So then you have a bunch of ideas spread all over like 4 papers and no numbers. So you have to really remember what you did first, what you did last. Order-wise.
Yeah. So it's really I think it's important to realize that the brainstorm is not just this natural unstructured activity. You adopt some conventions that we believe will help you in getting more good ideas out in a shorter amount of time. And so it takes a bit of training yourself to stick to those. Yes?
It was hard to keep the momentum going sometimes. Like, it sort of went in spurts. We'd have a bunch of ideas all at once, and there'd be like 30 seconds of silence until we realized we needed to switch to another topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So it can be hard to keep the momentum going, and that's why we have that guideline of building and jumping, right? While things are going well, just keep going with it, and then inevitably you'll run out of steam. Like, oh, that idea, no, I've already thought about that. And then it's okay to also take a break and say, let's do something completely different. And you can bounce around until you pick up steam again, do that again, and that's just the natural flow of how these things go.
I thought it was difficult to come up with ideas because we didn't really understand the problems, like those 4 things that you made us think about. We didn't really understand like what kinds of problems these people face, so we don't really have really good ideas. I don't know. Like that.
Yeah, it may be hard to come up with ideas if you don't yet know anything about your target users. So that's what today's lecture is about. And also, oftentimes it helps to, while you don't want to exclusively design for people who are like you, it may often help if you jump up from some personal experience you've had or someone you've met and take them as a stand-in to just give you some more fodder to develop ideas.
I'm not trying to self-censor or self-critique. I'm just trying to go with ideas and not think too much about them, and then how functional or what the ability was to be able to.
Yeah, so education is pretty good at developing our critical facilities. That's definitely more so true once you head on to graduate school. Right? You learn how to poke holes in arguments, and that is just the wrong time to do that. There's a time for everything, and
in the beginning, it's really just about getting many ideas out, and then you do the filtering later. All right. Just a reminder, the outcome of that brainstorm is due on Monday before class. And we also sent out the individual programming assignment 2, which is the drawing application. And just to let you know, starting with the second assignment, we will start to grade usability as well, not just whether you've checked off all of the boxes of the requirements, because that is how your applications will be evaluated in the real world if you put them out on an app store or work within a company. So that will happen. Thursday section tomorrow will cover key concepts, so I definitely encourage you. It will be the next iteration of like intermediate level Android concepts that you'll need for this homework. Any other question about sections? Okay, I heard back that we've roughly redistributed, so it should be a little. Attendance should be a little more even now. So this is one way to phrase the main point of today's lecture. Or to rephrase it, distrust your own intuition about design decisions, because you will frequently get it wrong. And what is better than relying on your own flawed intuition? Well, observe target users in their work context to inform your design. So let me give you a motivating example. This is a little old, but it's a good one.
You're about to see an incredible machine. This is the 8200 copier from Xerox. It feeds originals automatically. It gives you XL10 quality copies on both sides. It reduces, it collates, it even staples. Now, to operate a machine that does as much as the 8200, you'll have to acquire some very special skills. You'll have to learn how to do this.
All right, so that was the advertising version of how multifunction copiers work, circa 1983. But reality seemed to not match this advertising picture. So customers judged these copiers as being too complicated. But why? And so at that time at Xerox PARC, which is Xerox Research Lab, where a lot of personal computing was invented, Lucy Suchman, who was a UC Berkeley grad in anthropology, suggested to just videotape what happens when people interact with these multifunction copiers to try to get some tasks done. So let's look at that.
Now, here, I'm going to just do this. Okay. I'm going to press start. Wait, what if I want a two-sided copy? There's a bunch of buttons here. So output, paper tray, copy mode, one-sided. We want two-sided copies. Unload top paper tray. Collated unstable. That wasn't the paper tray, right? I guess this was a mistake. Then press start. Is that related to that? Unload top paper tray. That's not this. That's not the paper tray. It didn't say what the paper tray is. Anyway. What kind of unit? Oh, it's 49 must be on the other side. Going backward order. Yes. Okay. These two pages missing. Look, it was a case we got halfway through, right? Yeah. We do in fact have. Where is it? I don't see any hold on. I don't see any two-sided stuff. So this must be garbage. What is this? you take a look at that and see if that's, this is not two-sided. I claim there are no two-sided pages around here.
So before this, one hypothesis was that maybe the people who are using these copies are just not technically sophisticated enough. And well, this video was actually shot at Xerox PARC, at the research lab, and those two average users were Alan Newell and Ron Kaplan. And this was really the first time that the field of human-computer interaction and user interface design was a really public example for noticing that these difficulties, well, maybe they have nothing to do with the sophistication of the users, but there's this real problem of understanding what the interface, what the language of the interface is, and how to make sense of it, and that even very highly accomplished researchers and computer scientists can just be baffled by these issues of complexity in user interfaces. And for driving that point home, right, nothing works like doing the actual observation and then relating that back and saying, look, here's what happened. So there are many different varieties of observation techniques. So in particular, Lucy Suchman was trained as an anthropologist. So she was trained in watching, observing, and then interpreting what she observed. And in fact, a bunch of technologies that practitioners use in human-computer interaction come from anthropology, from ethnography. But then we've also developed our own methods, such as pager studies, where you give people, in the old days it would be pagers, now it would be an app that notifies you a couple times per day and asks you, what are you doing, or how was your interaction with a certain piece of software. For today, we're going to focus on two of these techniques, task analysis and contextual inquiry. And the goal for both of these is, once again, to understand the user's activities in the context where these activities occur, but not just to understand what people are doing, but in turn to take inspiration for how to design or redesign user interfaces and information technology. So it's taking observational techniques, but there's this larger goal of helping you design or change the design of a user interface. For today's class, let's pick as an example for task analysis writing BART. So here is the ubiquitous BART ticket machine. Some of the user's goals may be to buy a new ticket, add value to a ticket, pay with debit cards, credit cards, cash. Who writes BART in this room? All right, almost everyone. So that means you have some first-hand experience, maybe. Problems that you've experienced with this interface? Yes?
They return all of your change in quarters. So
Okay. You get $15 in quarters when you make change. So paying with cash and receiving cash in return is solved in a really suboptimal way. Yes?
I think the thing that irks me the most is a lot of times the buttons A, B, C, D on the side don't line up with the text and screen. And so you kind of have to try to match them up based on their order.
So here's a physical UI design problem. There's parallax between the plane that the buttons are on and the plane that the screen is on. Right? And as you have an oblique angle, a non-straight-on angle onto the display, you get misregistration. Okay, there were a couple of other people.
When you first go to purchase the ticket, it starts with, I think, $20. You just decrement down, and then trying to figure out sort of the most efficient way to decrement dollars and points is super annoying.
Mm-hmm. Yep, very annoying to go down to only buy a $3 ticket.
Yeah, it's just not intuitive. Usually you pick your destination when I've used other transit. You don't choose how much money to put in.
Okay, so you're arguing you want to think about trips in terms of destinations and not in terms of money, and the machine forces you to operate on a level of money.
Also by default, when you put in like a credit card or something, it defaults like $20 for a ticket. And I feel like typically people when they go to the booth to buy, they usually start off with like $3 or like $4 ticket. And they want like a really expensive ticket that's like not as rare. So like I feel like they should start off by default bottom up, not like.
Okay, so there may be a mismatch between default values and default behavior by users. Okay, let's do one more.
The only way to look at the price for the destination is on that piece of paper to the top right, and sometimes that has graffiti on it or some other place where you can't read it right. Yes.
So really important information is not on the screen, but rather pasted onto the machine where it may or may not have survived. Okay, well, there are many problems that you've identified. Now the question is, how do we go about improving this design in a really structured way? So how do we understand what the user's tasks are? So you have to think about who the users are and what it precisely is that they want to do. And so I'm going to take you through how to analyze the tasks, and then through some observation techniques, and how we take what you observed into scenarios that you can use for redesign. All right, here's a list of 11 task analysis questions. I don't think this is necessarily the canon of task analysis questions. These turn out to be 11 really useful questions that give you a lot of structured information if you just walk down this list and try to answer each question for the system you're analyzing. So let's just do that. All right, first question. Who's going to use the system? So here what you may have to answer are questions about identity. If it's a really broad product that is used by many different people, like an operating system or a ticket vending booth, you may have to think about different user groups that are very distinct from each other and think through their point of view separately. You have to know what their backgrounds and skills are. So what do they already bring to the interaction? Maybe their values, their likes and dislikes, and then definitely personal characteristics such as education, literacy, abilities or disabilities. So let's do that for Bart. Identity. What are the types of users you think who use BART ticket machines? One is college students who want to get to San Francisco on the weekend. Commuters. Okay. Elderly people. Why do you think elderly people write BART? Or what makes you think of them as a unique subgroup?
Because they don't drive because they're probably too old. And they have public transportation to get around.
Okay, so there's definitely a subgroup of people who choose to no longer drive.
They have like disabilities or
Yep.
the age into account.
Yeah, and so if you choose not to drive anymore because of physical infirmities, then definitely public transport should be accommodating to you. Yes, other groups?
Tourists.
Tourists, great. So how might tourists differ from commuters? Language. Okay, not everyone may speak English.
They might be unfamiliar with the design, whereas commuters go every day.
Yeah, so that goes directly into background and skills, right? Yes?
They might not know perfectly the geography of the town or
So there may be questions about how does BART even work, or where is Union Square? Yes?
Also, the type of fare that they buy is probably different because if you're a commuter, you probably have a Clipper card. You probably have a lot of money stored on it, whereas if you're a tourist, you probably only have a pen.
Okay, so types of trips and types of cards may be different. Any other groups you can think of?
People who can't afford a car.
People who can't afford a car. Very good. Okay, so I think we probably got, yep, tourists and visitors, regular BART riders, students disabled. Background, are you going to pay cash or not? Do you have experience with other public transit? Personal characteristics, we also already hit on these, right? So there may be, Spanish may be important in San Francisco, but also other languages may be important at different stations, like SFO. People are going to have varying heights. So if you're a very tall person, you may have, you pointed out problems with parallax. Those may be amplified. Same if you're a short person.
I guess this is in general. Do you want a subgroup as if it's John Q. Public, right? Do you want a subgroup as many as you can, or do you try and combine for overlaps, say with disabilities, like elderly and a lot of those same tasks will be.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
But before we get to that, I would argue that we actually just went about this the wrong way. Because, like, yeah, there are probably some people who can afford to buy tickets. There are some people who don't want to drive. How do we know whether that's true? That's right. Don't guess. Go out and observe. All right. How do you talk to users? Well, you can't do it from within 306 Soda Hall. You do have to leave this building. And so here, for example, you would just go to the downtown Berkeley station, and maybe also to some other stations. Talk to them. Find out what they do. How maybe you have an idea for a redesign, or you just want to uncover the problems. It may not always be easy to convince people to talk to you. They may seem busy, or you may be apprehensive about talking to them. The first thing that works really well is to just say, hey, do you mind if I talk to you for a minute? I'm a student at UC Berkeley. We're studying user interfaces, and I would love to hear about your experience with the ticket kiosk. Right? Saying, just informing people that you're doing this to learn for your education will make people much more likely to help you out and give you a minute or two of their time. As opposed to saying, you know, maybe I'm doing market research for some company that tries to sell BART a better machine. And maybe I'm less likely as someone else to give that person some of my time.
It's also like going down to the station where they're going to be waiting anyway is probably a better spot than when they're getting right after they paid for it and have got down there.
Yes, it's not quite clear whether BART will look favorably upon you interviewing people on the platform.
But at least
it certainly has been done.
Sitting there waiting rather than
Yes. Yeah, so
not knowing if they need
finding people who actually have spare time is a lot better than finding people who are in a great hurry. And then the other part is you can also buy people's time, right? Give them little trinkets of appreciation, whether it's a Berkeley sticker or candy or a coffee mug or anything that says, look, I actually value your time. Thank you for helping me out on.
Aren't you afraid of skewing your results then? If people don't have the time, maybe they're more in the commuter category, or people that accept gifts and can't accept candy on the platform.
Yeah, so if you plan a scientific experiment, such issues such as is overly incentivizing people inducing a skew in who will respond, that becomes an issue. If you are mainly early on in a design project and you want to get just exposure to people and their different perspectives, then it is less of an issue because especially the first 5, 8 people, right? Everyone will be different from the other person in some important way. And so getting those people is more important than ensuring that you've had a sample that accurately represents the greater community as a whole. All right, so here is a video by students at the iSchool that they shot while interviewing people at the BART station about their experience. And this should look familiar.
The whole subtracting for the $20 thing is really irritating.
So also what we observe here again is just bringing some recording equipment with you you have to ask people whether they're fine with you recording them. It's a good idea to keep the face out of the shot. Makes it that much more powerful to report back how irritating it actually is to have to hit this subtract button 20 times. All right, let's move on. Let's just go down this list. So what tasks do people perform now, and what tasks are desired? So oftentimes, you're redesigning some user experience that is already out there, right? And so that means there may be old tasks and maybe new envisioned tasks. One great example is the introduction of the Clipper card. A whole lot of things changed on BART when you suddenly had a stored value card that didn't have printed on the card how much money was left, and you no longer send it through the machine. So there's old tasks what people are doing now, new things you anticipate that will happen in the future. And when you observe these tasks, there are lots of things you can observe, and you have to make a decision of what the most important things are to hone in on. All right, so what are the tasks? Well, old may be, use various payment methods to buy a new ticket with some money stored on it, or to add fare to an existing ticket. New tasks may be use a credit card to get a Clipper card out of the machine. Get pricing information for the destination, which right now is only pasted onto the machine somewhere. Or buy a destination ticket, such as round trip to see the Giants. Let's move down. How are the tasks learned, and where are the tasks performed? So, how are the tasks learned? That has to do with what the user has to know. So, do they need training? And if so, where does that training come from? So, is there some manual which for a power station control panel, maybe it's perfectly reasonable that if you're a trained operator, you first have to read the manual and get some training. And then the general level of experience, education, literacy, language proficiency that people have to have in order to use your system. And so as a general rule of thumb, an 8th grade level of education is reasonable if you target many people. But as you narrow down, you may be able to ratchet those requirements up. But if you really want to reach a broad base, then having really technical language, etc., may be problematic. All right. So next question: what does the user need to know? Well, if it's a walk-up and use system, you can't really assume much of anything what they need to know for BART, right? Do they need training? How would you like at 8 a.m. rush hour, someone puts their card into the machine and says, would you like to take an interactive tutorial on how this machine operates? All of the people behind that person in line would probably not be so happy. And then experience level education and literacy. Well, we talked about commuters, right? So there's probably some importance that it's similar to existing designs, that they have used other designs. So if you have lots of people traveling from different locations, then that kind of puts some pressure on all of those experiences to look roughly the same. Maybe that's one of the reasons that all of the airports look so similar to each other. And you can maybe take inspiration from vending machines, ATM machines, other walk-up kiosks where you put a card in, follow some instructions, and have a brief interaction. All right, next question is, where's the task performed? So, is it performed in a lecture hall? Is it performed at home, in an office? Are there effects of the environment on people? Dark lecture halls make people sleepy. But it may also be, sound, comfort, etc. Is it outside? Is it going to be raining? And then there's the social influence of the environment. So certain interactions are acceptable in some places and unacceptable in others. It's perfectly acceptable for me to stand here and lecture in this room, but I wouldn't do the same if we all were, somewhere down the hill in a church. I would just start speaking very loudly to all of you. It wouldn't be my role to do that. And so the same can hold true for interfaces. And then there are other effects of other people, so bystanders, in terms of privacy, what information you reveal, also safety, and kind of throughput of a system if lots of people want to use it. So let's think about that for a minute. Here's some pictures of BART stations. How do you think this physical environment can affect the interactions at a ticket kiosk?
It's dimly lit and publicly accessible, so if you're riding BART at night, as anyone has done probably alone, you don't want to like turn yourself and be occupied for a very long time. It's dangerous.
Okay, yep. BART stations may not be the safest places, so you may want to keep interactions brief for that reason. Yes?
The place where a lot of people pass, so you want to make it fast so there are no queues that may obstruct other people.
Yep, there's a lot of traffic, so once again, an imperative on keeping interactions short. Other ideas?
The location of the queues matters because you don't want to put the queues the other side of the gate, so nobody can get through.
Yeah, so there's an important aspect of physical configuration of where you put your interface, so you're not interfering with people passing through the turnstiles. Here are a couple of others. It's often loud when trains arrive and leave, so voice I/O is probably not such a good idea. You may still have voice I/O for the blind, for example, but that is usually done with a headphone jack. Privacy, other people can look over your shoulder, so you probably don't want to show someone's ATM card PIN. You maybe also don't want to read that PIN out aloud. The lighting is dim, which means there's some limit on how much subtle information you can show there. So maybe you need high contrast displays. And then, yeah, there are rituals such as panhandlers, musicians hanging out in the station, people talking on cell phones. That may also affect where you place the machines. Maybe you want to place them away from the music, etc. All right, moving down our list. What's the relationship between users and their data, and what other tools does the user have? So data relationships, right? Privacy comes up. So where does your information live? Is it in that interface? Or is it actually somewhere in the cloud and you just use the interface to access that information? Or is it actually on the card? So when you lose the card, the information is gone. So can users move between machines? Well, clearly they should in a transportation setting, right? But that may not be always true in other settings. So at BART, right, users should be able to use any machine. Currently, the info is stored on the card. Well, that's for the normal tickets. With a Clipper card now, the data is no longer stored on the card. It's stored on a server, and you just have an access token on your card. Common data that's shared between all people is how much a ticket costs. So that's not a per-user decision. It could be. You could charge people differentially based on how often they ride. And what data is restricted? Well, your payment data. More importantly, though, and this is where we see a lot of growth and activity right now in user interface development, is having multiple tools to access your data and perform tasks and have those tasks distributed between multiple different interfaces. So we bring a whole lot of other stuff with us, right? So we may have a smartphone in our pocket. We may look up fare information online before we ever get to the machine. Maybe there are still printed schedules and maps. So there's a question of, can you use these other tools to offload some of the interaction from the ticket machine? So for example, in the future, maybe you use your phone to initiate the payment, or maybe you could even use your phone to decide where you want to go, and then just tag your phone on the machine, so you have even less interaction on the machine and the queue building up. You could get real-time info on your phone, which means you may not need it on the machine anymore. Or you could get alerts when trains are out of service, ideally before you ever get to the station. So there's a lot of activity in kind of thinking about at a systems level, how do we design experiences that have to do both, that leverage both your personal device and a kiosk or some institutional. All right, let's continue down our list. So how do users communicate with each other, and how often are tasks performed? So who communicates with whom, and about what? That's important to ask of any system you analyze, and especially if communication happens within some organization where there are established levels or standards for who's supposed to talk to whom. And if your system disrupts those channels, such as everyone email the CEO directly, that kind of organizational, prodding the organization in a new way often leads to a lot of pushback. So that's why it's important to know and understand what the current communication patterns are. In the case of BART, it's not really that relevant. You don't friend other people who also use this ticket machine. You don't chat. You could think of chatting with maybe a service representative. It's late at night and the machine breaks down. But in general, there's no, each interaction is a single user interaction with an automated system. And then you have to ask how often the tasks are performed. Frequent users remember and build expertise from previous interactions, so they may remember more details, and the infrequent users just may need introductory help of how to even get started. That does not mean that you should treat your users as unsophisticated, as you've seen in the Xerox copier example, but rather that they just don't yet have the information or the knowledge. It's never been offered to them before. So, and then you should ask yourself which functions are performed most frequently by which users, and this is, once again, the architecture simple of make the common case fast and the uncommon case possible. All right, so for BART, what does that mean? Well, we have varying frequency, right? A lot of people, the commuters, may write BART every single day, and then maybe the next biggest user group, we don't know. We'd have to interview and maybe get some statistics. Maybe people who take it really infrequently, and it may be their first time in the city. And then different tasks also happen with different frequency. Every write, you have to tag your card, but adding or buying a new card may happen infrequently. It may also happen automatically. So, for example, one task I've now run into repeatedly that is driving me crazy is if you have an automated system where your employer puts some money into an account that you can then use to put on the BART ticket, and the two systems are out of sync. Every couple of months, you'll say, sorry, your card was declined. You don't have enough funds on there. So then you have to add. But it actually turns out to go one cycle through this process right now takes about a week. You go online and say, well, I have to change my monthly allotment. And they'll say, thank you, we received your request. You'll get an email in about a week when this is done. And so things really get out of sync. And it's an infrequent interaction, but one that gets really painful whenever you hit it. All right, last two questions are there time constraints on the task? And what happens when things go wrong? So, which tasks can wait and which are really critical? And is there some relationship between tasks where one thing always has to happen before something else? I would argue for BART, people will always be in a hurry, almost always. So then you get lines. And so you really want to optimize each interaction to be as short as possible. Now, this will be a really important and fruitful source for design ideas to observe what happens when things go wrong. So how do people deal with errors in the interface, with practical difficulties, small errors, and really big catastrophes? And is there some way to get back out of it? So what could go wrong on BART?
Don't put enough money on your card. It lets you go in, and then when you get to the place and try to get out, you can't get through.
Exactly. And what's their backup strategy?
Add cash to the ticket. I don't know if they take credit.
So the backup strategy is to put more machines inside the fare gates to let you get out of that situation, right? Other observations of minor mistakes and major catastrophes on BART.
When your BART ticket gets like desensitized because like next to your credit card, or like so that it doesn't.
Yep. So the old system uses magnetic strips. There's a way to lose information on the strip, and then you may just be out of luck. There should be a value printed on that, but oftentimes that smears off as unreadable.
System down. So.
Yeah. What happens when the Clipper database goes down?
You have the sticker provided by the person at the gate, so that when you come out, hopefully the system in the other place works, and then they'll readjust your card.
Yep. Another one that has happened to me is I walked through, but I was actually not tagged on the way in, which means I can't get back out. And the only way to get around it is to go see a station agent, talk to them, they scan your card, and then let you go out a side door. All right. So in the interface itself, there may also be just the need for a start over button. Or it may be, I bought a $40 ticket, I only needed $20 worth of rides, now I'm leaving San Francisco, what do I do? Machine eats card, strip gets desensitized, what do you do then? And so thinking through all of these cases really usually is a really rich source of design inspiration. Here's one of my favorite errors on BART. There are actually two things that can go wrong here, right? One is you put the card in the wrong slot. There's another one.
I've seen people try to go to the wrong door, so they put it in the slot, they try to go to the wrong door.
Yep, exactly, and you walk right into the turnstiles. That can happen for a second reason. I don't know if any of you have ever observed that. Okay, I see a couple of hands go up. Yes?
Like sometimes if you, when you put in ticket and it comes out at this end, some people expect to be at the other end. So since they never take it on for the actual open.
Yeah, so if your ticket is scanned correctly, it goes in and through the machine. If there's a problem with your ticket, the ticket comes back out. But you may have already walked and not looked, especially if it's rush hour, right? So you walk right into the turnstile. All right, so these are the task analysis questions. How do we now turn this into the right, stuff for redesign? So you observe people and you ask these types of questions yourself. You can also ask these of people. And so you end up with these real tasks. And then you decide on really kind of key tasks that are either especially problematic or especially common, and then focus in on those and try to get reasonable coverage of everything you've observed. But it's going to be hard to always design for every possible case. You're going to have to make decisions where to allocate your time and energy. So it's often good to have a mixture of simple and complex tasks. So what are common short tasks people do with the interface? And then what are the difficult, more involved, complex tasks that maybe only experts engage in? And you want to think through both ends of the spectrum for your interface. What should tasks look like? Well, one important thing for task analysis is take the perspective of the user. What does the user want to do, and what do they need, and not how they would do it with a given interface, right? You're not yet at the stage where you're proposing design solutions. You're just trying to understand what people do and what works and doesn't work. And you can maybe have some considerations, such as, dim lighting means you need high contrast screens or high contrast information. But really, phrase it more in terms of dim lighting means people have trouble seeing details of what's going on. So it's very good to make the tasks very specific rather than general. So you can, next time we'll talk a little bit about personas. So you can generate aggregate profiles of the different people you've interviewed, like the harried commuter, who's often also carrying a coffee cup in their other hand. So that's kind of an archetype of a user that you can use to say, we'll adopt this perspective. What does this particular person need? All right, once you have tasks in design, you basically write up a description of the tasks and then have specific scenarios that cover each task. So what a person would do in interacting with the technology, and then based on that, you can rough out a particular interface prototype. So the write-up can be formal or informal. You can, if there are multiple people, go together and see if it rings true what you just wrote up. Or you could also, go back to people and get another round of feedback, whether that represents what you wrote up represents it fairly. So here's, for example, a task. Jill's traveling to Seattle for her job, and she wants to check on the amount she can be reimbursed for meals and other expenses. Right? That's a task someone wants to do. Or you can elaborate that further, give details of, the setting, the location, maybe the time of day, other motivations, other things that are going on, and that makes it more apparent what the motivations and the limitations of a particular person will be in a situation. And then you take these tasks and you start coming up with ideas for interfaces that support very specifically these tasks. And initially leave other things that are not in the task, just leave them out of the design. Focus on things that support the core tasks that you've observed people doing, and really focus your energy there. One great example is Bart Kiosk. So this is once again a redesign from a UI design class at Berkeley. Let's say we have a downtown Berkeley station. And so here's a redesign based on this task analysis. These are the same students who you saw film that video of someone pushing subtract 20 times. And so their redesign suggests actually having, for example, quick ticket to SFO. And so the very quick way, this is a common task that they've observed, so let's make that easy. Put it right up in the beginning. Or if you start over, it could show you maps. Someone here also had the idea, let's make it destination-centric instead of money-centric. That also probably came out of their observation. And then but now there's an interesting challenge in that you still only have these 8 buttons. So they came up with a very interesting idea of just breaking down a map into different segments, labeling them. And so, for example, I live in San Francisco, so if I want to go home, I'll hit C to Glen Park. And back when they designed it, that says, OK, you need 370. Give me a single ticket for $3.70. So this is kind of a complete example how starting at observation and actually setting the scope of saying, well, the hardware is going to stay exactly the same. We're not going to rip out all the kiosks. All we can change are the pixels.
on that display can lead to a drastically reimagined user experience for buying tickets. All right. Those are the basics of task analysis, and now I just want to give you a, yes?
I guess with current BART screens, I don't think they're actually colored, right?
No, they are.
They are colored.
Because there's yellow text on blue background.
Okay.
However, even if they weren't, right, you could think about designing around that restriction and say, how would you make this idea work for a monochrome screen? So you couldn't use color, but maybe you could draw outlines around areas or shade them in grayscale. Yes?
Does the screen resolution of the BART use such a small variety?
That's an excellent question. So that is something that you would have to find out. If this was your proposed design, you would have to find out, right? And get the technical specifications and then make a prototype, even if you don't have access to that kiosk, that uses only that resolution and see if it would work or not. So they're definitely, it's entirely possible that legibility becomes an issue, especially if you have another layer of glass on top that may be scratched with graffiti where resolving small details becomes problematic. Yes?
Can you chance of BART switching over?
That's a good question. I don't know. So I know Yuba, he ended up not working for BART. He got a job as an interaction designer at Adaptive Path, which is a web design consultancy in the city. Worked there for a couple of years and now has a transportation startup, but it's not around redesigning the BART interface. So there's a whole other question of, even if you come up with a radically better design, what are the institutional barriers to get it adopted? And that is something that CS160 can unfortunately not tell you much about. All right, let's talk about contextual inquiry. So this is a different way of understanding your user's current practices. The goals, in the words of the inventor and popularizer of this technique, is to go where the customer works, observe the customer as she works, and talk to them about their work. So the goal is to really get inside your user's head, and that means getting outside of your own head and adopt their perspective. And you do that by finding where the customer does their work, the user, going there, and then having a mixture between observation and interrogation and interview. So it's an important middle ground between just observing and not intervening, or just going somewhere and asking people about what they do. So the guideline here is the master-apprentice model. And that means you as the designer, you're not the master telling people about how great of a designer you are. You're the apprentice, right? You want to consider your target user as an expert in their domain and learn from them. And so reasons for doing this apprenticeship is that oftentimes people may not be able to tell you what's important about their work, but they can do it. Or they may not regard it as important, but you will see it and say, that's unusual. Why do you do something in a certain way and not another way? And sometimes really literal apprenticeship is best. So if you look at automatic bread makers, a revolution in automatic bread makers was observing how bakers twist and stretch the dough. And so basically now there's a robotic mechanism inside the bread maker that also twists and stretches. The principles of contextual inquiry are context, partnership, interpretation, and focus. And so let's go through each of them one by one. Context means you want to go where the work is. You want to conduct your inquiry in the work environment. Don't invite people to a coffee shop or to their, unless they're baristas, or to your office, because you're going to miss all this environment that
tasks take place in if you remove the user out of that environment. Also, people tend to summarize and go abstract in accounts of what they do, and you want to have access to all the rich detail. Like, why are there 10 different post-its posted to the bezel of your monitor? Right? Those kinds of things that tell you there's some kind of breakdown in the underlying technology are important for you to notice and really hard to miss if you're not, really easy to miss if you're not in the right context. And when you ask people questions or when you talk with them, always bring people back to the concrete instances and out of abstraction. So when you say, hey, we usually get these reports by email, you say, can I see one? Can you pull it up for me so I can see what it looks like? So you get much richer detail of what the work experience actually looks like. Second principle is partnership, which means you want to have respect for the people you interview and follow this master-apprentice back and forth, which means you can interrupt and ask, why did you do that? What happened there? But it's this back and forth between observing and engaging in a conversation. And that's different from alternative models, such as interviewer-interviewee, right, where one person just asks questions, the other person answers. It's also different from being expert-novice. You're not pretending to be a complete novice. You have this training as a designer that you bring to bear on the situation, so you can have that inform what you ask. And it's also different from being a guest and a host, right? You're there to get information about this design situation, and that may mean asking more probing questions than if you're just a guest of honor who gets led on a tour of what the offices look like. So why argue for master apprentice and not just one of the other models? What's wrong with interviewer-interviewee? Ideas from the room? Why not just interview people?
It's just sort of one way, like the interviewer just keep on asking, and the interviewer may just answer and then stop.
Okay, maybe too one-sided.
In the reading, it said that sometimes the person answering won't have very good detailed answers unless they're physically doing something.
Yeah, so it's easy in an interview to glide off into abstractions, which doesn't help you out enough for your design.
Because the interviewer might not know the important points to ask them about.
Yeah, you may not know what questions to ask. And conversely, the interviewee may not be able to tell you their account of what works well and what works poorly is shaped by their own experience, and they may not notice breakdowns they are having. So here's a great example. The design of the kitchen measuring cup, a short video clip about this.
This guy's name is Steve, and this guy's name is Mike. They're cousins. They design toys. And several years ago, they sent us this prototype. And instantly we saw this, and I was like, this is so ingenious. But we needed to test the theory. So we went to get a bunch of users, and we asked them the question, what's wrong with your measuring cup? And they'll say, well, it's glass. If it breaks, if it drops, it breaks. When my hands are greasy, they're slippery. When I heat things up, they get hot. I said, okay, well, anything else? No, we're happy otherwise. Okay, show us how you measure. So the pour, they bend down, okay. Pour some more in, bend down, okay. Pour some out, like 4 or 5 times, right? Nobody mentioned this as a problem. Because this is an accepted part of the process of measuring, right? End of that. And we're happy when we see this kind of problem, this clear inefficiency that nobody articulates. So this is a cup we made. You stand there, you pour into a certain line, and you stop, and that's it. So we sold a couple million units of this in the first 18 months. There's no word required, and there's this pet peeve there that people don't realize that they have, and they get it, and they get the pet peeves and the solution at the same time. And those are the best kind of products for us. And I'm showing you these because it does not require special training or educations or whatever degrees that you have to invent things. It requires keen observations to people's problems and the confidence that you can come up with a solution to get it done. And
yeah, it's a great example where straight interviews may just fail because people don't realize they're not expert in design, in envisioning alternatives. They can tell you some of the problems, but others may only become apparent to you in observing what they do. And that's why it's really important to be in the context and to observe as well as have a conversation. All right, third principle is interpretation. So good facts are only the starting point. You still have the responsibility as the designer to interpret what that means and to find the patterns. And oftentimes, you need to check back whether your interpretation is actually a correct reflection of the user's point of view of a situation. So the good strategy here is to rephrase, to say, so what I think I hear you saying is that you're concerned about the cup breaking when you drop it. And then the user is going to say, yeah, that's actually, and this has happened to me. Or they say, no, that's actually not what I meant at all. But maybe I'm concerned about putting it in the dishwasher where it gets too hot and may chip or break. Right? That's why you can't just only observe. You also have to probe and have this conversation whether what you think you saw actually matches what your participant is trying to tell you. And then the last principle is focus. You're there to inform the new design or the redesign, so that means you have to stay on useful topics. You can observe all day long, lots of irrelevant parts, and it's kind of your responsibility to steer conversations in the limited time you have back onto the UI or a particular work process. A couple of thoughts. You can't just show up and say, let's do this inquiry. It's really important to establish some level of comfort between the person who's letting you into their work environment and you, so it's often good to have initial conversations when you set things up and set expectations, such as, hey, it would really help me if I could video record part of this. Can you please let me know what's off limits because it's maybe confidential information and where this is fine. And so just being considerate ahead of time will make things go a lot smoother. Master apprentice, staying in role can be really hard. Don't correct people when you see obvious inefficiencies in their process. Right? You're there to document them and then to design a system that will avoid them in the future, not to teach them better process. That's just not the role you're in when you do these observations. And it's also hard not to sketch something out and be like, what would you think about this? You're putting someone in a somewhat awkward situation when you do that. And so most of the time, the answer you're going to get back is probably going to be, that looks pretty reasonable. I think I would like that. And you actually haven't uncovered that much useful information in the process. All right. So summary for today is we talked about task analysis and contextual inquiry. Task analysis is just a structured way of walking through a list of questions to understand users and their tasks. You want to find real tasks with sufficient coverage, and then maybe anticipate new tasks, and then use those tasks to drive the design of your new user interface. Right? The new UI should first address those tasks and only those tasks. That's how you really stay on focus, especially early on. And then contextual inquiry is a way to help you answer the task analysis questions. And it's this hybrid between observation and interview, and a really productive hybrid. And the key to making that work is to find a way to slip in that master apprentice role and stick to it to get people to teach you what they know about their work. All right, next time we're going to switch to conceptual models. There's a reading assignment, so you're going to read a chapter of the humane interface and then start with 2 sections of a longer reading on direct manipulation. Get started on it because you're going to read the remaining sections for Wednesday of next week. So by the end of next week, you'll have read both, and that's kind of a good halfway point. Don't forget your reading response, and get started on programming assignment 2 early so we can give you help with enough time to spare before the deadline. Monday before class.